VikesNow. I'm Dustin Baker. I'm here with Josh Frey. It's March 16th. We have 3 days of free agency in the books with a kind of climactic Friday coming up for some things we're going to touch on at the end of the show. But foremost, sir, how's the week been treating you? Busy?
It's been a little bit busy, but it's good. It's good. We're finally getting into the thick of things. March Madness starting up.
Oh,
It's been a
yeah.
good week.
You better tease your bracket finalists. What's the national championship?
National championship. I think I'm going Houston, and then on the other side, I think I got to ride Arizona. So
Okay.
that if anybody out there is making a bracket last minute, there you go.
Yeah, it's super last minute too.
Yeah.
I I follow the Gophers when it comes to college basketball, which was a huge whimper this year. So I had to just rely on efficiency metrics for my bracket, and I ended up with Houston over Alabama. That's what I got, but it's not. Don't bet on that because it's kind of like me talking about soccer or golf. I'm just shooting bricks. But this is a Vikings show, so enough of that foreplay. There are probably six large seismic in the grand scheme of things items that happened to the Vikings, and then about 20 others, whether it's Dalvin Tomlinson to Cleveland or Patrick Peterson to Pittsburgh. I don't think we'll have time on this show to talk about where everybody else went. We'll get to that in the next few months. But foremost, to start all the festivities, you and I had speculated for about 2 months that the two things the Vikings don't need are offensive tackles and tight ends. First thing they do is sign a tight end. And then after you saw the deal, it was kind of more team friendly than most believed. So the sticker shock was fake. But I want to know, Josh Oliver, do you like it? Why or why not?
I definitely see a reason for it. We've also talked about we didn't necessarily think tight end was a need per
Mm-hmm.
se, especially with Hawkinson at the top there. But over the past few years, you could definitely say that especially a blocking focused tight end has been a bit of a struggle there for the Vikings. And Josh Oliver is about as good as you can get in that department. So I think the combo of him and Hawkinson at the top of the tight end room, especially if the Vikings are trying to do a little bit more balance on the offensive side of the ball in terms of running the ball a little bit more than they did last year, I think that this is a really solid move. And especially like you said, it's a team friendly deal, so you can't get too upset about it. The only interesting thing is they've now got 5 tight ends now on that roster. So that's going to be a position battle to watch during training camp. So something to look forward to there as well.
Yeah, because Ben Ellefson was re-signed, and we won't touch on that besides right now. And it's like, why are you doing that? You just got Oliver, and then Nick Muse is on there, and of course Hawkinson. And so, yeah, it's a crowded room. You have to believe it'll be Hawkinson, Oliver, and then probably Ellefson with Muse again on the practice squad, but way too early for summer speculation. But yeah, he's a Viking, and we were talking with McKinney about it last night, and I think we diagnosed that it's the first true blue prominent blocking tight end since Jim Kleinsasser, who played for the Vikings for, my goodness, was it 13 years? And the entire McKinney period. And that's all McKinney knew. Here's the one that it's the most intriguing aspect for you on this show because of your former ties to the Saints. The big news from Monday night was that the Vikings, for 1 year and $13 million, had acquired Marcus Davenport, who wasn't on any of our radars because we didn't think that A, Za'Darius was going to leave for sure, and then B, that the Vikings would be players for one of the most would-be expensive edge rushers on the market. But then it happened, and I sent you the screenshot, and you were kind of like, "Oh, whoop-de-doo," and I was like, "What?" So tell me why Marcus Davenport in March is not a home run signing by your estimation.
Well, I think obviously you could look at the numbers and say the production, just especially last season, wasn't necessarily there. I know there's a little bit more in depth you can go to in that in terms of like win rate against offensive linemen. I I think that for 1 year, if you're trying to do like, especially if it's a 1-for-1 replacement of Zadarius Smith, you could definitely do a lot worse than Marcus Davenport, especially if he's able to stay healthy. But that's one of the biggest knocks on him throughout his Saints career is he just hasn't been able to stay healthy, hasn't been able to stay on the field, and he's just a super inconsistent guy
Okay.
from game to game. Like he'll have a couple games where he just blows up and he's like, oh, this dude, he's finally here. This first round pick he's finally turning into that Cameron Jordan replacement that Saints fans have been looking for over the past few years. And then there's other games where he's just non-existent. Seems like he's not necessarily putting out the greatest effort on the field as well. So that's my biggest worry about this signing is just the $13 million that you're going to throw away and he goes out and does a couple nice things, and then the rest of it is just kind of like, could have done that with anybody. But for 1 year, I don't think that it's necessarily a huge deal that they did, especially considering that they didn't give him like a 3-year deal, like $40 million, something like that. So you definitely could have done a lot worse, but I'm not super excited to see what he does for the Vikings this season. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and he just needed a change of scenery too.
Interestingly, on your free agent bingo card, you had a litany of Saints, and he wasn't one of them. So yeah,
I did.
I kind of when I
Yeah.
sent you the news, which you'd already seen, I was like, you know what? He didn't even mention that. Maybe he didn't think that was realistic, but no. Contrary, it's that you're kind of underwhelmed. It's basically your wait and see approach. If this guy would have been drafted on the 4th and 5th round, of what draft was it, 2018? Would the
Yeah.
story be different?
I think it might be. And this is especially considering that the Saints traded away a bunch of draft assets in order to get him.
Yeah.
I think it was pick number 14 in the first round as well. So that's another reason that Saints fans have just never liked this guy.
Okay.
But yeah, I yeah, it's just a consistency thing. If he can go out there and give you a couple nice pressures on a weekly basis, get a sack here and there, then I think this is a good signing for the Vikings, especially 1-year deal. Pair him with Danielle Hunter, potentially Zadarius Smith stays there as well, but we'll see what happens there. But yeah, not super excited about it, but I'm not gonna not crazy too much either, considering this is a very low risk.
When you talk about him and the Saints fans' perception, it almost sounds like it's their Bradbury, where you're just kind of
It
like
kind of is. Yeah, that's a very good comparison.
the following day. Speaking of Garrett Bradbury, he's back and he's on another team friendly deals all around. It's like Spielman never left. Do you like Bradbury back, or is that a nah?
I was kind of like Ned going into it, but seeing how team friendly it ended up being, I don't think you can knock it too much, especially if he continues to go on the trajectory that he set in 2022. Like, obviously, the back injury is a little bit of a concern considering he didn't look great in that wild card game against the Giants, but with a full offseason to recover, hopefully he comes back healthy. And I think that if you're going to get a starting center as cheap as that, like, you can't be upset about it.
The Quasi bomb from later that night. Everything happens at night for Quasi Dafamensa. You and I have joked about that off air.
It's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for tonight. I'm waiting for about 8:15, 8:30
Exactly.
p.m. when something happens with Dalvin Cook or Harrison Smith or Zadarius Smith, which we'll talk about in about 6-7 minutes, because that's when they do their business. Byron Murphy from the Arizona Cardinals. We knew the Vikings would get a cornerback. We thought it was going to be Cameron Sutton. Nope. He went to the Lions, but they did get their man. And interestingly, Murphy's Pro Football Focus grades are decent. They're not like, they're not Duke Shelley territory here. And then his passer rating against in 2022 was like 102 point something. And so why are those numbers wrong, and why should fans be excited about Murphy?
I think you should be really excited about Murphy, mostly because he's played almost 50-50 throughout his career, either on the outside or in the slot. Mm-hmm. So I do think that the Vikings do need to go get another true slot corner at some point this offseason. But the fact that he can play either one of those positions is a really good sign, and something that we should be looking forward to. 2022, it was a little bit of a weird year for the Cardinals in general, with everything going on in the background with that organization. And he was going through injuries as well. I think he might have had a back injury at some point during that season. Maybe it was a groin, something like that. But he did have an injury that knocked him out. And I think that might have played a little bit of a factor in some of the drop off that he had in 2022. But looking at that 2021 season, I think he played just outstanding and was one of the big reasons why the Cardinals were able to make the playoff push that they were able to that season. So I think that there's definitely a world where this guy bounces back, get him healthy again, kind of like Bradbury, and just get him back to that 2021 form. Maybe pair him with another veteran corner at some point, and I think the secondary is looking a lot more promising than it did last year.
Murphy missed 8 games because of a back injury, and I think perhaps minus concussions, back injuries are the ones that you're like, oh boy, what is the implication going forward? So it makes sense that his performance would have suffered, especially if he played with the injury at all. And so you just have to hope for the best. Do you think they bring back Duke Shelley or sign another decent cornerback? Because I'm not confident that they would just roll with Andrew Booth and Byron Murphy and call it good, or draft Deonte Banks. Which is more realistic? Shelley, a different free agent, or the first rounder used on a cornerback?
I think right now, considering some of the contracts that have been handed out to corners this season or this off season, I think bringing back Duke Shelley could make a lot of sense at this point. I don't think any of these corners have really broken the bank, and that maybe lowers the market a little bit for Duke Shelley, and maybe especially if they're looking for a guy that can compete for a starting role. I wouldn't feel great about Duke Shelley. I hope that one of those younger guys wins it, and maybe he's switches over into that slot position like he was before. But if you're looking for a depth guy as a veteran, I think that you can't do much better than Duke Shelley considering what he did last year. And I think that he definitely has that mentality that you like to have in a secondary where he thinks he can go win every single battle.
Yep, and he's notably still a free agent, has said that he wants to come back to the Vikings, was PFF's fourth best quarterback somehow in 2022. And then of note, Brian Murphy's deal was originally reported by the powers that be as 2 years, $22 million, but it has since been redefined or clarified to 2 years, $17.5 million, and it's basically a prove it deal, kind of like Zedarius had to an extent last year. So we shall see. It's certainly somebody that can start. It has a lot more, inspires more confidence than roll with Andrew Booth and Caleb Evans and maybe some early round draft pick and hope for the best, especially to bring back Shelley, because then you've got a decent room with whatever you want to draft and pending Booth and Evans development. The next one was Kirk Cousins. It was, you're trying to decide as a pundit or a fan, all right, are they going to roll with this guy again? It appears no. It seems like they're going to let 2023 play out, at least as of this moment. They could announce, all right, Boyd years be damned. We're extending the guy by 2 or 3 years, but that probably would have happened by now. So what they did is kick the can down the road. I get sick of that phrase because it's usually used as an insult. But it really did this time. $28.5 million of Cousins deal goes not to 2023, but as soon as he's off the team, it floods onto the books. So does that aggravate you, or was it the only thing that could be done?
I really think that at this point, if they weren't able to come to more of a team-friendly extension, I think that this is the best thing that they could have done. I think this really amplifies the idea that they're going to go after a quarterback some point in the 2023 or 2024 drafts. So if you're looking at that, the $28.5 million dead money, that's a lot of money for one guy on your books. But if you're pairing that with a rookie starting quarterback or second year starting quarterback on a rookie contract, it kind of evens out a little bit. And then 2025, it gets even better for you. So I think that this is probably the right move. And who knows? Maybe if Cousins plays out of his mind again in 2023, leads the Vikings to like NFC Championship game or something, maybe they come to a new 1 or 2 year deal where he sticks around for a couple more seasons after this one. But I do think that this was really at this point the only move that seemed the most realistic. I don't really get on board with extending Cousins for 3 or 4 years down the road at this point, just because I think at some point this team has to move on. They have to find the guy that they really think that they can go win a Super Bowl with. So I think that this is just the best move right now.
Notably on Cousins, if indeed he shows up in a contract year back against the wall and plays tremendously, even better than he usually does, like something 40 touchdowns, 10 picks, 5,000 yards, then we're going to be in a territory of probably a 1 or 2 year extension worth about $45 million, because that's probably going to be
right.
The average. About 40 million will be the average rate for Daniel Jones is getting that right now for a good quarterback, Dak Prescott, Derek Carr-ish, and anything else will be just those guys like Baker Mayfield who are trying to establish their QB1 supremacy again. You and I are going to talk about this ad nauseum after a free agent wave, but I want Vikings fans to start getting prepared. I started to really dig into this yesterday because the writing is on the wall that they have to draft a cornerback. If they don't trade up with a big Godfather deal for Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, or Will Levis, you got to get used to either Josh's guy, Clayton Tune, in a mid-round, Tanner McKee, who's basically Cousins younger, not very mobile, or an old rookie. Because Josh clarified for me this morning that because of the COVID fallout and NIL, that all of these rookies are they feel like either 25 or 26. The Stetson Bennett's, the Hendon Hookers, and even Jaron Hall is going to be 25, I think, in like a week. So it's Clayton Tune still your guy? Like I said, we'll talk about this a lot in the next 6 weeks, but Clayton Tune would be the guy to take a stab at, if any.
Yeah, I think that he offers the most upside out of those guys in the mid rounds, especially if you're looking at a guy that can potentially jump in year two and be a starter. Because Hendon Hooker would be another option, but I'm just a little bit concerned about him coming off that injury and potentially it impacting some of his rookie season. And then maybe it's a little bit more of a slower progression with him into a starting role if the Vikings opt to go that way. So I do think that Tune would be the best option, or at least the safest bet, just because he's got a huge arm. He can run a little bit. He checks all those boxes that you like in a modern day quarterback. So I think that he would be the best option. Maybe go get him. I feel like he'd be available round 3, round 4. So that's probably the option for me right now.
Yeah, if indeed Yannick Eckhart from Vikings territory has suggested Hendon Hooker as a compromise, a meet in the middle where you get the mobile quarterback. But the trade-off is by the time the Vikings even contemplated starting him, he would be at least 26 and perhaps 27, his age 27 season. And it's like, go figure that the Vikings would get in bed with the good rookie quarterback, and the guy is 5 years of his rookie like precious years already behind him. It's very odd the way it goes, but I guess this is what the hand that COVID dealt to us. All right, the last big news item arrived yesterday, and I think when you look back at it, it'll be like, big deal. Alexander Mattison resigned. What's big about that? But it was a surprise because most believe that he could get a large contract in the open market. That wasn't true because no running backs really get large contracts if their name isn't Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley. And so Madison's back, which casts into doubt Dalvin Cook. Do you like Madison being back, or is that meh?
I'm kind of like indifferent to it at this point, just because it's such a cheap deal. I think it's worth 6.35 million guaranteed over 2 years, something like that. So I don't think that this is an expensive enough contract that you can have really a strong feeling either way on this. Or at least, especially in the negative sense, like you can't be too mad about it just because he's taking up a very minuscule amount of cap space for you. But I do think that this sort of is the writing on the wall that they might be ready to move on from Dalvin Cook. I wrote yesterday over on Purple PTSD. I don't think that this doesn't look like it's going to land in a trade anywhere because, one, you got Austin Eckler already on the trade market. And two, the Cowboys just released Ezekiel Elliott, who's making just as much as Dalvin Cook. And he's just adding to an already super deep free agency class at that position. So 14.1 million on the books for this year. I don't feel like a lot of teams are going to be super interested in taking that on when they can go get a David Montgomery for $6 to $8 million a year or something like that. So yeah, I feel like eventually this is probably just going to be a post June 1st cut where you just cut ties, save $9 million against the books, and you just move on with Alexander Mattison and Ty Chandler.
And that is a segue to our final topic, a masterful one. Nice job, sir. There are 3 big decisions looming, not because, Kwesi, hurry up, damn it, like we're impatient. It's that significant portions of contracts guarantee tomorrow, Friday, St. Patrick's Day. And you touched on your opinion on Dalvin Cook. It sounds like you predict a outright release, which would fit the Vikings' MO on a Friday, giving that player the spotlight, the thank yous, the tributes. But there's also Zadarius Smith, who said goodbye 1 week ago today. And we were like, what? And the Vikings were like, what? Because we're not doing anything with you yet. Now we got Marcus Davenport. Now we can chat about that. But he evidently, it's very Packer of him. He doesn't want to play here anymore. And then Harrison Smith. He's been on the rumor mill for a pay reduction or at least a contractual restructuring, but nothing's happened. And you would have thought that if he wanted to leave Harrison, he would have been gone by now to have pick the litter in free agency. So predict what happens, A, with Zadarius Smith, and B, Harrison Smith.
I think Zadarius, you're probably just going to cut ties with him. You save $12 million against the books. If you do that, it's pretty easy money. So I do think that that's going to be probably the route that they take, especially now that they signed Marcus Davenport for 13 million. Seems like a pretty even 1-for-1 swap out there. And then Harrison Smith, I feel like there's going to be a pay cut at some point with him in the next 24 hours. So I feel like he's got to stick around. The Vikings have to know that outside of him, they don't have a ton of experience at that safety position right now. So if he does end up getting cut, that's another position that we're probably looking at in the draft or later on in free agency. Like somebody's gonna have to sign here because you got Lewis Cine, Cam Bynum, and Josh Metellus. I don't know if I want two of those three guys starting in my secondary right now. So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting. But I think Za'Darius is out, and then Smith's probably a pay cut, or Harrison's probably a pay cut.
Yep, and especially after the legendary Chris Thomason tweet with the Prince picture. If you are a casual Vikings fan, go to Twitter, check out Chris Thomason's Twitter, and look at it was just a perfect tweet. And then Chris Thomason, interesting,
Doesn't
veteran.
get better than that.
Yeah, oh man, it was so good. Chris Thomason, a veteran of this show, he was on last year. He's going to Denver, the Broncos. He's going to cover Denver, and he will be missed. All right, man. It's kind of crazy to think 1 week from now we'll be talking about a whole list of 4 or 5 more developments. If the Vikings follow their path from last year, this is kind of when they cooled off for about 5-6 days in terms of new signings. Doesn't mean it has to happen again this year, but they signed Harrison Phillips and Jordan Hicks out of the gate, and then took a week off, and Za'Darius was signed 1 week later. So just keep that in mind. Any closing arguments until we reconvene next week?
No, I just think last 24 hours have been a little bit quiet. Doesn't mean at all that the moves are over, like you said. So I think we should buckle up. It's going to be another busy week next week.
Yep, and get your computers or your phones out after dinner, because that's when all the Vikings big news goes down in that 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. hour. All right, man. We'll talk to you next week.
Sounds good, man. See ya.
Later.